What's a dark part of American history that gets no attention in schools? The beginnings of the city of San Francisco are pretty nasty. During the gold rush, the entire city was basically lawless, and the only women in town were prostitutes. There were pirates, murders, lynchings, etc. etc. At one point, the U.S. Army nearly invaded the city. The entire city was burned down twice over by pirates. If anyone is interested, a great book about San Francisco, The Barbary Coast, an informal history of the San Francisco underworld by Herbert Asbury, also wrote Gangs of New York.
San Francisco had a rough start. During the gold rush, it was chaotic and lawless. The only women around were often prostitutes. There were pirates and lots of violence. The army almost stepped in at one point. The city got burned down a couple of times by those pirates. If you're curious, there's a book called The Barbary Coast that dives into this wild history. Worth checking out if you're interested.
Edit. Poor white men in the U.S. didn't have a right to vote until 1856, 14 years before black men and 64 years before women. Many narratives imply that white men have always had the vote and denied it to others, but historically only the wealthy had control of government. Edit. Universal manhood suffrage began earlier, in the West about 1820, and wasn't nationwide until 1856. Edit 2 Math.
It's interesting to think about how voting rights have evolved over time. A lot of people assume white men always had that privilege, but that's not the whole story. Historically, it was really more about wealth than race or gender. This change unfolded in layers, and it took decades for broader suffrage to finally come into play. Kind of makes you reflect on how far we've come and how messy history can be.
One of my first bosses after I graduated high school and went to work back in the mid-70s was born and raised in HI. He was 15 years old and lived on Diamond Head when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. He ran down to help and was put into service helping move dead bodies and checking to see who was still alive. He still got tears in his eyes when he talked about it, and he was probably in his mid-40s when he was telling us this. He said it was the worst time of his life.
That's a heavy story. It's hard to imagine being that young and facing something so traumatic. The impact of those experiences stays with you for a long time. Hearing him talk about it must have been intense. It's a reminder of how history shapes people, especially those who lived through such pivotal moments. It's interesting to see how it affected him even years later. Life has a way of leaving deep marks.
Lived in Oklahoma for most of my life. Took Oklahoma history, and it wasn't mentioned. You know what was mentioned? Native Americans, not in Oklahoma, but in everywhere before they moved to Oklahoma. Then the last 2 weeks of the class, we discussed Native Americans in Oklahoma and the land run. And of course, never learned of the riots till my dad was just randomly browsing Wikipedia and stumbled upon it and showed it to me.
It's interesting how education sometimes skips over important events. I remember a similar situation when I was in school. We learned a lot about certain historical figures but barely touched on local history that affected our own community. It's strange how we often find out about significant events from random sources, like Wikipedia, instead of our classes. It's like there's a whole story behind our own backyard that we never get to hear.
If you read Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, there's a short section in it talking about how Christopher Columbus was an idiot who didn't know how big the world was, but was really, really lucky there was an unknown continent there. In the 1700s, it seems common knowledge that Christopher Columbus was not a hero. I wonder what caused the idolization of Christopher Columbus. Edit. Minor text fixes.
It's interesting how perspectives change over time. Columbus was once viewed as a great explorer, but history shows he made some pretty big mistakes. People seem to forget that luck played a huge role in what he found. It's a reminder that context matters, What was considered heroic then looks different through a modern lens. Maybe the idolization came from a desire to celebrate exploration, despite the truth behind it.
Expanding on this, they actually didn't all live on prairies and teepees or huts or whatever you choose to call them. They had full-blown civilizations, and most lived in houses just like the Europeans that decimated them. Our history makes it seem like they were savage barbarians when in fact they weren't.
It's interesting how history can be skewed, right? I remember chatting with a friend who had a similar take on how we view ancient cultures. He pointed out that a lot of indigenous civilizations had advanced societies and complex structures, yet often get reduced to stereotypes. It's a reminder to always dig deeper and question what we're taught about the past. There's so much more to learn beyond the surface.
They taught us about that in California, but when I moved to Georgia, not a word. Just seeing the way California and Georgia frame history differently was interesting though, and kind of scary. Up north, Sherman is a war hero who did what he had to do because he believed it would end the war quicker. Down south, though, he was a mentally unstable general who just liked to kill and burn.
It's funny how perspective changes everything. Growing up in California, I learned one narrative, but moving to Georgia opened my eyes to a completely different story. It made me realize how history can be shaped by location and culture. The same person, viewed so differently. It's a reminder that context matters, and everyone's experience shapes their understanding of events. It's wild to think about how much we don't know.
Something similar, Squanto, one of the natives that assisted the Pilgrims, and 4 other Native Americans were abducted from a Patuxet village by an English explorer. Squanto was able to speak fluent English because he was practically raised in England. When he finally returned to his homeland, he found his village empty. His village and other local tribes have been decimated by a recent plague. European diseases are estimated to have had a 90% mortality rate. I highly recommend Lies My Teacher Told Me. It has stories like this and also explores how American history is whitewashed.
It's interesting how history often gets simplified. Squanto's story shows the complexities of early interactions between Native Americans and Europeans. He learned English, returned home, and found his people gone due to disease. It's a reminder that many narratives we learn about the past leave out significant details. Books like Lies My Teacher Told Me help shed light on those overlooked stories, making us reconsider what we think we know about history.
When I was a kid in the early 80s, my dad told me about the Tulsa race riot. This was before it was as well known as it is now. He told me that if you go to the libraries in Tulsa and look through the microfilm of old newspapers, the ones for the days when the riot happened and was in the news are missing.
I remember hearing about this from my dad too. It's wild how certain events get erased from memory, especially ones that are significant. The idea of missing newspaper articles just shows how history can be shaped or hidden. I wonder how many other important stories are buried like that. Each time we dig deeper, we uncover pieces of the past that tell us who we are.
The race riots were literally ripped out of our Oklahoma history books. My teacher addressed this, showed us the torn edges, and taught it anyway. She was badass. Edit. So obviously I have no way of proving that a textbook I had read 10 plus years ago had those pages ripped out, but I did get into contact with an old teacher who was my friend's mom. She said that apparently the TRR were a part of our curriculum when I was there, but that they were not in the years prior, and that is when the district ripped them out. Apparently our school did not have the funding to purchase new books that were not already ripped, so they made a lesson on how badly Oklahoma wanted to bury the occurrence. Super sad. My teacher was still a badass though.
That sounds like a really interesting experience. It's wild how history can be manipulated like that. Your teacher seems like she really cared about making sure you learn the truth, despite the circumstances. It's a shame that some important events get ignored just because of budget issues. Makes you think about the responsibility of educators to keep history alive, no matter what. Just goes to show, some people will fight for what's right.
I had to look it up on Wikipedia. I never heard of it either. I think that it happened in 1921 partially explains it. Seems like popular histories dealing with racial oppression in America start with the Civil War and then skip straight to the Civil Rights Movement in the 50s and 60s, as though nothing happened in between.
It's interesting how our understanding of history can be so limited. A lot of significant events get overlooked. I remember chatting with a friend who had no idea about certain incidents, and we ended up diving deep into research. It was surprising how much context there is. Learning about those gaps can really reshape perspectives, making you realize the ongoing impact of those events today.
I had many teachers that were Vietnam War vets. They provided quite a bit of ancillary anecdotes about what the Vietnam War was like in shop class, history, math, etc. It weirds me out to think the newer generations don't have grizzled vets spewing war anecdotes to get kids to TIFU about their casual teenage woes in class.
It's interesting how different the classroom experience can be. Those vet stories really put things in perspective. I remember listening to a history teacher who shared his experiences. It kind of made the regular teen issues seem small. Nowadays, I guess teachers have different backgrounds, and those war stories aren't as common. It's all about finding ways to connect and teach lessons, I suppose. Times change, but the need for real-life lessons stays.
I'm a West Virginian whose family fought at Blair Mountain. I went to public school in WV and was required to take West Virginia history as a class in elementary and middle school. We were taught nothing about the mining wars. Not one word about it. The state has so much interesting history, and we only learned about the early colonial days and the Civil War, and that Pearless Buck was a West Virginian. My father was so angry about it. Last year, they just opened up a new Mining Wars museum. I'm hoping that when I go back, I can visit it.
It's interesting how history can be overlooked in schools. Your experience highlights a gap in the curriculum. It's kind of surprising that such a significant event like the mining wars wasn't taught, especially in a state with that background. Your dad's frustration makes sense. The new museum sounds like a good way to learn more about it and connect with your roots. Hopefully, it provides a fuller picture of your state's past.
Actually, in the UK, we're not taught about it at all. It never gets mentioned, because here it was just a footnote to the much more important Napoleonic Wars. When they cover that period in British history classes, you will hear a lot about Napoleon and Nelson and Trafalgar and Pitt the Younger and Wellington and Waterloo, and nothing about America. They don't even cover the American Revolutionary War.
It's surprising how some parts of history get overlooked. I remember discussing this with a friend who took a history class in the UK. They were shocked to realize that key events like the American Revolutionary War weren't even mentioned. It made us think about how history is taught and which stories get prioritized. It's a reminder that there are always untold stories in the greater narrative.
To be fair, except in global history, I doubt we learn much about the Netherlands and the States. I did learn about the Benelux countries in college around 1990, though, but that was in a political science class. I also learned all about the Soviet Union at the exact same time it was collapsing, which was kind of cool.
It's interesting how some places barely make it into the curriculum. I remember learning about different regions in college, too. My experience was pretty similar. We touched on a lot of cultural and political aspects, but some countries just get overlooked. It's a bit wild to think about studying the Soviet Union right as it was falling apart. That must have added a certain urgency to the lessons.
Spoilers. I mean, the effectiveness of the program seems to be greatly misrepresented, but it's cool that they're basically showing what if it actually kind of worked. I love how this was an 80s style show that totally considered what came just before it. So often period pieces only show things from that time, with no consideration for the fact that their recent past would still be affecting everyone in that time. Mentions of Kennedy's assassination, MK Ultra, earlier horror films, etc. really brings the 80s to life, because that brought everyone into the 80s and helped comprise it.
I can see what you're saying. The mix of history and fiction gives a nice touch to the show. It's interesting how they use past events to shape the characters and setting. It makes the story feel more real. The references to things like Kennedy's assassination or MK Ultra really connect the dots for viewers who know that history. It shows that the past doesn't just disappear, it sticks around and influences the present.
Stephen Jay Gould wrote an interesting piece on this in The Flamingo's Smile. Basically how the test was biased from the outset, and no wonder so many immigrants failed and were considered moronic. You would too if you just come off a very, very long boat ride in cramped quarters and then were forced to take a timed test in a language you barely knew.
I get what Gould's saying. Tests can be really unfair, especially for people who aren't used to the language or the setting. I remember a friend who moved here and had a tough time with the driving test. He had to focus on the rules in English while adjusting to a new culture. It's crazy how circumstances can skew results, but we often overlook that.
My dad, who went to school in the 70s, never heard of any of the violent things the Japanese did except for Pearl Harbor. When he asked what I was studying, I told him the rape of Nanking by the Japanese. He thought I was talking about an actual person named Nanking being raped and was terribly confused.
That's an interesting story. It shows how different generations perceive history. Your dad's understanding was shaped by his own education and what was emphasized back then. It's kind of surprising how certain events can be overlooked. The contrast between what you learn now and what they were taught can lead to some awkward conversations. It definitely makes you think about how history is presented in schools.
Unfortunately, the Tulsa race riot was not and has not been part of the state curriculum for Oklahoma history. Pretty fucked up, no? There's a bright side to this, though. Senate Bill 1381 was passed in 2012 that has introduced the Tulsa race riots into the state curriculum. I'm not sure when / if it has taken effect, yet, as I'm pretty far removed all of that now. But better late than never, I suppose. I went to Jenks BTW, tongue sticking out.
It's wild how some important events don't make it into school lessons. I didn't learn about the Tulsa race riot either. Senate Bill 1381 sounds like a step in the right direction. It's good to see changes happening even if they come late. My old high school, Jenks, could definitely do better. I just hope students are actually getting the full story now. Learning history is important.
This is why I was glad I went to a private high school. We basically followed all the banned books through high school English, and our history teachers had a "you may not like it, but this stuff happened. You're going to have to learn to deal with it" approach, especially with some of the lesser talked about WW1 and WW2 stuff.
I can relate to that. My friend went to a similar school, and they really focused on the hard topics too. It wasn't always easy for everyone, but it definitely opened their eyes to history's complexities. They often mention how it helped them understand different perspectives and not just the mainstream narratives. Those lessons stuck with them well after graduation. It's cool to see education challenge your views like that.
There were more events that happened before and after the Haymarket Riot, and more came out of the Haymarket Riot than just an 8-hour workday. Child labor was one of them. You're correct, and thank you for pointing this out. I could have written more on the subject as I took a course on Chicago history in both high school and university. Both courses had an in-depth topic on the Haymarket Riot. It's just surprising that some people didn't know about this. Hence why I posted this. The thing is, I was mobile on my phone, and Reddit has a short reading/attention span, like me. I didn't feel like writing a research paper on my phone, constantly fat-fingering every third letter. However, look at the discussion generated from my simple fat-fingering post. Cheers, smiley face.
It's interesting how a brief comment can spark a whole discussion. I had a friend who once shared a simple thought online about street art, and it turned into a huge debate about its impact on communities. He didn't expect it at all. Sometimes people forget the power of small statements. Just goes to show that even quick thoughts can lead to deeper conversations. It's all about perspective and sharing ideas.
A good friend of mine said the reason his grandfather moved to the West Coast because a Mountie broke his leg with a crowbar during the strike, and the hospitals in Winnipeg were overcrowded. So he went out into the countryside to find a doctor. He found a good one who was able to set his leg, and he kept going west to escape the Dust Bowl famine. So many foreigners think the Mounties are so cool, but they have a pretty bloody history of being brutal corporate stooges.
That's an interesting take on history. It's wild how personal stories can highlight the darker sides of things we romanticize. Your friend's grandfather must have been tough to endure all that and keep moving forward. It's a reminder that not everything is as it seems, and even iconic figures can have complicated pasts. Makes you think about the different narratives people carry with them.
They're still around. They provide security guards to various government contractors in and around Washington. While I delivered pizzas there, I had standing orders from my boss, who came from West Virginia, that if any delivery customer turned out to be a Pinkerton, I should bring the pizzas back to the store unsold.
That's an interesting delivery rule. I guess your boss had some reasons for avoiding the Pinkertons. It's kind of wild to think about how their presence is still felt in some places. Makes you wonder what kind of situations those guards have been involved in. Delivering pizza can lead to strange encounters sometimes. Who knew a simple job could connect you to such a complex history?
Eratosthenes later rounded the result to a final value of 700 stadia per degree, which implies a circumference of 252,000 stadia, likely for reasons of calculation simplicity, as the larger number is evenly divisible by 60. 16. Repeating Eratosthenes' calculation with more accurate data. The result is 40,074 kilometers, which is 66 kilometers different, 0.16%, from the currently accepted polar circumference of the Earth. 1700 years after Eratosthenes' death. While Christopher Columbus studied what Eratosthenes had written about the size of the Earth, he chose to believe, based on a map by Toscanelli, that the Earth's circumference was 1/3 smaller. Had Columbus set sail knowing that Eratosthenes' larger circumference value was more accurate, he would have known that the place that he made landfall was not Asia, but rather a new world. 18. That's not how math works, Chris.
It's funny how history can hinge on a math mistake. Eratosthenes nailed the Earth's size, but Columbus didn't trust it. He took a shortcut with a map and ended up in the wrong spot. It's wild to think how one belief changed everything. Just a simple misunderstanding took him to a whole new world, not the one he was aiming for. Not always a straight line in history.
To be fair, there is a crap load of history that the UK has before even getting to the forming of the US. I don't remember getting taught much about US history at school other than the Cuban Missile Crisis and Sputnik. This was the late 80s, so very apt, but I do remember the cover of my history book having Norman Rockwell paintings of US freedoms, so there may have mentioned more in the book. I also remember studying atrocities like the Amritsar Massacre, so not much time to study things going on the other side of the pond when we're busy creating history. TLDR, the US is a big landmass where they also speak English and stuff happens.
It's interesting how history is taught differently. I had similar experiences in school. We focused a lot on local events, and not much on other countries. I remember learning about world wars but not really grasping how they shaped places like the US. It felt like there was so much going on elsewhere, but we just skimmed over it. Just a big land with its own stories, you know?
I'm a member of the Choctaw Nation on my father's side. Didn't grow up in that culture, however. It's interesting, though, that if you trace my family back to the mid-1800s-ish, one of my ancestors was actually adopted into the tribe as a child. It's because she was the last surviving member of tribe that was wiped out.
That's a pretty unique connection to your heritage. It's interesting how family histories can reveal unexpected stories like that. Being adopted into the Choctaw Nation must have had a significant impact on that ancestor's life. It's a reminder of how cultures adapt and evolve over time, even in tough situations. It makes you think about the resilience of communities and individuals.
I was born in 1970 and am black. It never dawned on me until I was well into being an adult that this was all going down just a few years before I was born. I somehow came to believe that the really bad racism ended at some point before I was born. I went to a very conservative, mostly Euro-American school. It wasn't until the last few years that I came to understand what my parents went through. How fresh it all was. As a young person, it all sounded so long ago. As a middle-aged person, I can see how recent it really was.
It's interesting how our perspective changes over time. Growing up, we often think things are in the past, but then, we learn the history is closer than we realized. Talking to my parents helped me understand their experiences better. It shows how important it is to listen to older generations and recognize the lingering effects of the past. Makes you think about the progress we've made and what's still left to address.
Jim Crow, as I learned it in school, there were some laws that were unfair to black people, and then they skip right to Brown versus Board of Education and Emmett Till, way underplaying all the shit that went down in the nearly 100 years between the end of the Civil War and the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement.
It's wild how history can be taught so simplistically. In school, they glossed over a lot, like the everyday realities people faced during that time. My friend told me about their own learning experience, where they had to dig deeper on their own to understand the full impact. It's just important to get the complete picture, not just the highlights. There's so much that shaped the world we know today.
I actually did learn about it in college, but that was a rare gem of a history teacher who wanted us to know real history rather than glossed over patriotic history. It was incredible to have Oklahoma history that was more than just the French trappers, the Trail of Tears, the glorious land runs, and the Okies in the Dust Bowl.
It's cool to find a teacher who digs deeper into history. A lot of people just get the surface stuff. Learning about the real stories behind a place can change how you see it. Makes you appreciate the complexity of the past and how it shapes the present. Staying curious about these things can really open your mind to different perspectives. That's the kind of knowledge that sticks with you.
I distinctly recall reading that the verbal assault was recorded through a one-way mirror with the video, then being played back to you as your unhappy expression grows, to further exacerbate however you felt. The guy they had attacking your ideas was a high-profile prosecutor, if I recall correctly.
That sounds pretty intense. It's wild to think about how they use that kind of approach. Seeing your own reaction while someone tears your ideas apart must feel really surreal. I guess it's one way to deal with criticism, but it just seems harsh. Not sure how I would handle something like that. It's tough to see someone you respect go at you like that.
He used an old map to infer the circumference of the Earth, so it was 1/3 smaller than the actual size. He wasn't smart enough, I guess, to realize that a world map at the time isn't going to chart the part of the world people hadn't ever visited. Likely the world map he used was created using hundreds of other maps, and combining them into a single map. It's as basically like buying a map of the Americas and taping it into a circle and measuring it to determine the size of the Earth.
That's a classic case of relying on outdated info. You can't blame him too much, though. Back then, maps weren't as accurate. It's like trying to figure out how big your city is using a sketch from a kid. He probably genuinely thought he was onto something, but those maps missed a lot. Just shows how important good data is. Kind of funny in hindsight, really.
I just graduated grade 12 in a small-town Canadian school. The issue of First Nations rights was a major topic that was covered in many subjects. There are a surprising amount of courses in the school, too, dedicated solely to teaching about the Native people, such as Native language, history, and cultural/religious courses. They teach very in-depth about how they were wronged and the struggle that the First Nations have had to go through in order to just barely start achieving autonomy and equality. They were quite popular classes too. The classes were composed of history geeks wanting to learn about their region, natives wanting to learn about their background, and people looking into the new and ever-expanding job market for dealing with native legal cases and land and settlement treaties.
It's interesting how education can shape perspectives. In a small town like that, having those courses definitely opens up conversations. It's cool to see that people are genuinely interested in understanding the history and struggles of the First Nations. Sounds like a mix of motivations brought a diverse group together. It's good to learn about these things, even if it's just to create awareness and appreciation for different cultures.
My niece is mixed race, born in the mid-1990s in NC. I remember her telling us of the racism of parents at school. She had white friends who'd invite her home to play, but she never once got to visit. Every single time, in every single family involved, the mothers always had a reason why she couldn't come around that day. Doctor's appointment or some equally innocuous reason. But every single time for about 10 years.
It's tough to hear stories like that. Kids can be really aware of how adults behave, even if nothing is said directly. It's a shame that her friend's parents missed out on what could have been a simple friendship. It must have affected her way more than anyone realized back then. Kids deserve the chance to play without restrictions based on things like race.
I'm surprised myself. I ended up going to top engineering college, and everyone thought I was the one Texan who survived the ravages of Texan education. Took me a while, and introducing them to many of my friends from my school, for them to realize I at least went to the one school that was the exception, although where I'm from had several good schools.
It's interesting how perceptions can change. You go from being seen as the typical Texan kid to someone who surprises others with your college choice. It must have been nice to show them that not everyone fits the stereotype. Sharing your school experiences with friends must have helped bridge that gap. It's cool that you had a solid foundation even if others didn't expect it.
I actually didn't realize racism was still a thing outside of movies till I moved out of Texas to NYC. In our school, being different made you cool. Except the kid that didn't shower. He got picked on cause he smelled. That was a bad different. Then I saw racism in real life and was kind of shocked that there were people outside of like the KKK who I saw in movies and TV that were still racist. I know not all of Texas was like where I was, but I feel like most Texans I have met are pretty cool.
It's interesting how our environments shape our views. Growing up in a place where differences were celebrated, you tend to think everyone thinks that way. Moving to a new city can really open your eyes to realities you hadn't seen before. It's a mixed bag everywhere, I guess. Some people are just ignorant, no matter where they come from. It makes you appreciate the good people more.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.